After discussing about programmatic in a cookieless world and gaining programmatic maturity, now we are continuing with an industry panel discussion where the panelists will talk about marketing 2020, how do we make it effortless. The chat is going to be moderated by Lucia Mastromauro, VP Global Client Partnership from Adform. Lucia, over to you.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you everyone for logging in, for being with us in this panel. I've got a wonderful set of panelists here that I would like to introduce to you guys. My name, as Gabriela said, is Lucia Mastromauro. I work at Adform. I've been in ad tech for about 10 years. I've been a brand and a vendor and a publisher. But I think we really want to hear from Krunal and Paul, who have been in the industry combined, I think, for the whole life cycle of this industry. Krunal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Krunal Patel, General Manager for Matterkind UK. A lot of you may formerly remember that as being called Kedron quite a long time ago. And I'm quite excited to join this panel and share our ideas and opinions about where the industry is at in the current situation.
Thank you, Krunal. Paul?
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Frampton Calero. I'm the president for EMEA and APAC for a business called Control versus Exposed, which is part of the Goodway Group. So we're an independent marketing services organisation that supports brands in building out their technology and data stack and actually activating within the programmatic space as well. Prior to that, I was running a startup across Europe, and prior to that, I ran Havas Media Group in the UK. So as Gabrielle says, I'm fairly old.
I don't think that was what we meant.
I think that's what you're implying.
It's just so many years of experience. Well, thank you guys. We are here to really discuss a little bit on what this year has meant for the industry and how do we come out of this, shining? How do we take the learnings forward? It's been a very unexpected year. Overnight, brands had to evolve. They had to pivot very quickly. Offices, we had to shut them down. Everybody's working from home. Advertising spend, it's surprising how so many businesses have managed to survive through the declining spend. It has not really been a very easy year for those in the service side of the advertising. Has had to become a lot more agile. Everybody had to do a lot more with less, and become extremely more flexible. So it's been a massive evolution within the industry, even though I think we haven't really portrayed it outside so much. So given all of that, I really wanted to dive down into what effortless modern marketing should look like by the end of 2021, because doing more with less is not an easy ask. And into 2021, how really the industry leaders can take it, the learnings and move into a future that's proof, in a way that allows us to execute and deliver more value to our advertisers.
Yeah, so, from an industry perspective, let's look at that. So this has been a big problem, not just for advertising, but every single industry, that we're currently seeing across the globe. But in advertising specifically, we knew that consumer changes were coming, right? The rise of mobile devices, tablets, the way consumers engage with different channels and everything. So COVID almost kind of accelerated that consumer behavior. Advertising remains fluid. We've seen that consumer touch points are across multiple different channels, sort of thing. So the way digital channels are consumed has changed drastically. Some advertisers, for example, have turned away from traditional channels like out of home or cinemas because they've been hit the hardest, and they're moving more into podcasts, audios, and everything. We've seen a rise in subscriptions on video demand services, right? And that's also at the expenses of cinemas and traditional TV. So, we are seeing the behavior changes from consumer, which is making us as an industry and marketeers to come up with a way where we can engage with these consumers across multiple different channels, sort of thing, right? So it's all about how do we truly create an omni-channel approach and engage with our customers at the right time across those right channels.
Brilliant. Do you think that all of this change, what will it mean within the next decade? Because we can see how it's changing things now, and we're having to adapt very, very quickly. But in regards to kind of the next decade and what sort of toolbox the modern marketeer will really need to take it forward.
So I would echo a lot of what Krunal has said, in that the last 3 months have almost accelerated the same amount of change that a lot of brands expected in 3 years, based on shift to e-commerce, D2C, digital being more and more important. And as Krunal says, we all knew that, but it's just sped up. And I think it's forced a lot of brands and agencies and businesses full stop to stop and look at how they need to change the way they do things, how they sell, how they talk to customers, how they acquire customers, how they retain customers. All of that has changed, and there's been a big doubling down on digitization and on technology. And in 10 years' time, I think we know that that's going to have accelerated even further. What we don't know is who the big players will be. If we look at some of the big players that are around today, some of them are still only 10 years old. Some of the newer social platforms, or just teenage years. Something like Google's been around for a couple of decades, but will we see new tech platforms alive in 10 years' time? Pretty sure that we will. I think what we can confidently say is that talent and technology will need to work in an ever closer harmony. And all media will be in some way addressable. You can obviously say that you can't target an ad in a newspaper addressably because it's physically print or whatever else, but the vast majority of advertising will be bought via technology, and data will be used, because the combination of machine learning, automation, and businesses having to look for efficiencies will drive that kind of behavior. So this is a wake-up call to all businesses to think about jumping more quickly into that future.
Fantastic. And just coming back from 10 years from now back to today, and in the past 3 months, well, more than 3 months, 6-7 months now, we've seen many of the external factors that have accelerated that future, kind of push things forward. Aside from COVID, I wonder how, since you guys work more closely with brands, how things like Black Lives Matter, you know, looking at the health aspect of the well-being, how have brands really, how does that have impacted their interaction with their consumers? I think it's where I'm getting into. Have you seen any change in regards to the response from brands itself in regards to the more intense conversation around some of the you would say a bit more political, but subjects of matter for society?
Yeah, so, you know, first of all, let's talk about the attributes that modern marketeers need to have and to thrive in a world which is very unpredictable right now, as we just discussed previously, right? So I think it's genuinely challenging, you know, when you're stuck indoors and working from home for such a long period of time. So I think for any individual right now, they need to be self-starter, right? Because it's important that in the current climate and the day and age that you know, you're taking the initiatives yourself. As we discussed, industry is changing and it's going to keep on changing, but as we just found out, at a rapid pace. So it's also important for individuals not to get tied up too much into just doing their day-to-day job sort of thing, but continually learn, right? Continually educate themselves, continually make sure their behaviors about advertising and planning and everything is in line with the changes that we've seen across the board. Being agile and flexible is also quite important, right? It's about work-and-life balance. I have a wife and a kid, and I can tell you, you know, at times it's very difficult to manage the both. So it's about, but you know, I'm quite lucky to be working for an organization like IPG, which kind of embraces flexible work in an agile championing, right? So again, it's about how to build trust with your employees, how to build trust with your clients when you're not going to see them for, you know, such a long amount of time, apart from just a video conferencing and everything. So being self-starter, making sure that you can strike a good balance between work and personal life, be agile, And still in this then building that trust with your colleagues, with your organization, with your clients is quite important. So those are the 2 or 3 key attributes that you need to make sure that they know you develop as a modern marketeer in the current situation.
Lucia, picking up your point about what's changed from a kind of social, kind of economic, political perspective, I think it's quite interesting that pre-COVID, the world was probably fighting against globalization because the Trump administration went, America great, Brexit happened, lots of different nations across Europe were looking at kind of going back into their own territories, and some of that's still happening, right? But both COVID and Black Lives Matter actually connected the world in a way that we haven't seen for a long time. There are very few countries that have avoided this horrible pandemic, and the issue of race and color is pretty much one that also affects the world. So on the one hand, you've got that global connectivity, which I think has made brands think about, well, if we're in a global conversation as well as a national and local conversation, that means we need to behave differently. But then you've also got this local dynamic where we're all stuck in our homes, where we want to support the local businesses that are shutting down, and the people around us are more relevant than they've ever been. So I think you've got this interesting tension between global and local going on. And brands need to step into these conversations because governments are struggling with them, maybe because they have questionable leadership that actually isn't focused on changing some of these social factors. But let's not go there because this isn't a political discussion. There is a time for brands to actually step in and make genuine change. But it's not just about tipping your hat to it with a social media post. I think we've seen lots of brands get caught out from trying to go, we support BLM. It's the brands that have actually put their hands in their pocket, like Glossier or Disney, that are actually putting money behind change, or Netflix that changed its whole product catalogue and put all of the films and movies and series with Black actors at the front of its proposition. It's those type of tangible through the line actions that matter, not, oh, I fancy supporting something because lots of people are engaging with it. And I think more than ever, this pandemic is catching brands out, and marketers need to recognize that they can't just story tell anymore. They actually need to do and deliver the stories that they're telling. And it needs to be authentic, because I saw a statistic the other day which frightened me, which was during this pandemic, more CEOs have stopped communicating on social media and more businesses have stopped communicating on social media than prior, which I just find very strange, because you'd think that people should take a leaf out of the book of someone like James Timpson that runs the Timpson's business, who's on social media talking about the issues of furlough, talking about how they're encouraging people to work from home, people with families to have that flexibility, like Krunal said. And it's the brave brands that are willing to be in the conversations when they're difficult and actually do material things to help change, rather than the ones that want to surf the opportunities just because there's a Google trend report that says, oh, you can get more traffic. And I think we will find a lot of brands will really struggle with that, because authenticity is no longer a nice to have, it's an essential.
Yeah, and I just want to add, a little bit to that as well. So obviously that's from a marketing perspective and everything, but I think it's also important to remember that every human being who works in, especially in order, it's down to them as well to make that change as well, right? So when it comes to the planning, when it comes to creating those creative messages, as Paul mentioned, Disney and a lot of the other clients. Recently I saw a Coca-Cola ad, which is about the change, and it was so powerful, right? So again, it's not just about marketeers and everything, but it's also making sure that us as an individual working in this industry, when we are planning and buying these campaigns and everything, our creativity and our messaging aligns to it, right? Because it's down to us to make the change. And you know, Black Lives Matters movement and the COVID as well are just two elements of it. You know, there's still things about, you know, being open to LGBTQ plus community, right? It's about unlocking your unconscious bias sort of thing, something that, you know, we try and train a lot of people at Matterkind sort of thing. So it's also important to make sure that us as individuals are starting to take ownership of this. No one's saying that Black lives matter more than any other lives. All we're trying to say is Black lives matters too, right? So it's not about superiority between the race across different lives and everything. So it's important that people understand this. It's not just a trend or hashtag on a Twitter or social media. It's about how do we fight that together and come up with solutions or planning or creative messages that kind of really informative and really engaging for the consumer, and that makes them think.
Well said.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing, if I may add a thought here, is that the past few months, even though it separated people physically, it opened up the arena for the conversation about empathy. At the end of the day, behind every brand, there is a person, and every consumer is a person. We work in technology, we work with numbers, etc., trends, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's just a human-to-human conversation, and it's nice to see that being reminded.
Very true.
By everything.
And we have to, when it comes to technology, we have to remember that as well.
Yes.
It's shift towards technology, but it's the technology that improves those connections and actually enhances them that actually drives real social value.
Exactly. So moving on into a bit of more tech, before the pandemic, I remember being CES, and the talk of town was the demise of third-party cookies. I remember many agency folks being pretty upset with the news back in January. The pandemic hit. Some folks kind of stopped a bit that conversations, others continued. How do you view, is that still a very relevant conversation? Do you think that perhaps enough people care enough to make change into the future, or do you feel like brands will just, you know, sit back and feel a little bit sort of resign themselves to kind of oblivion in a way, and just, you know, glide a very different path, or the path that has been set for them?
Well, I mean, it's every week that goes past, it becomes more of an urgent issue to address. I think the challenge is there's been so much other stuff going on, like, can I actually keep my staff employed? Am I actually going to have revenue next month? That when that happens, things possibly move down the priority list. But the reality is, for people in our industry, for people like Krunal and myself and our clients, we have to focus on it, because it requires it's almost going to turn the industry upside down. It doesn't mean there aren't solutions, and it doesn't mean there isn't innovation, but I mean, Apple, with its IDFA announcement in the last couple of weeks, it's been pushed back a little, but it's coming. That's another new walled garden. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but brands have decisions to make around how much do I trust where I put my money into walled gardens, and so I can actually measure it. But they also have to understand that there's been this silent exchange between publishers and consumers and advertisers that have all relied on the third-party cookie. That has enabled advertising and targeting, which has allowed publishers to get paid, which has allowed them to obviously fund content. If Apple and Google remove those rights and force subscription, then that very much changes the value of what publishers have. So it kind of plays with the economics of advertising, which is pretty fundamental, as fundamental to, can The Guardian still get people to pay for the newspaper, right? These things are pretty big issues. And if brands and marketeers and agencies don't lean into these issues, then we are going to have issues, because we need to get consensus that there are a handful of solutions. Today, I'm sure we couldn't even count the many different solutions that are on our fingers, because Google will come up with their own solution. Then independent companies will come up with their own. I think right now, I think it's important that brands actually get their heads around what it means. What are the implications of not just cookies going away, but Apple suddenly pushing publishers to have to find new revenue streams? And what does that mean? And how does that impact on the first party data that a publisher has and the first party data that an advertiser had? These things are big issues of the day. And I do think I would challenge some marketeers try to stay a little bit too high level, and they need to. One of the challenges for a modern marketeer is they need to get into the data, into the tech, and into the attribution to understand whether their money's been spent in the right ways. Because if you don't, then how can you sit in front of your CFO or CEO and tell them that our money is going to the right places?
Agreed. And, you know, as Paul mentioned, because of the situation we're currently living in right now, our priority list changes pretty much on a weekly, on a monthly basis. But let's not forget, since Google's announcement, for example, right, time is ticking, right? So yes, we've got issues that we're dealing with right now, but it's also important to make sure we're also prioritizing issues which we know is going to affect us in the long term, in the future, right? Us as a MarTech and an EdTech space, we committed to increase consumer privacy, right, without sacrificing access to content. And when you are living in a world which is unpredictable, because we don't know what that world is going to look like in 3 years' time, what kind of impact it's going to have. The best thing you can do is to actually focus on what you can control as an advertiser, right? So that means starting with your own first-party data, and admit that not every single advertiser will have access or reach data sort of thing, but it's not an evolution. I see this as a revolution sort of thing, right? Where you have an opportunity to harness your data like never before. Rise of CDPs, DMPs will be important more than ever before sort of thing. You have in the space, in the EdTech and master space, you have someone like LiveRamp, for example, who's selling their authenticated traffic solution as a way of bridging that gap and making sure it's more PII-based solution sort of thing. Axiom's PII-based data solution as well, that's in the market. Again, it's about how do we adapt. It's about how do we harness your internal data first, and then going out to the third-party technology vendors that we just discussed, and strike a balance between where your consumers are and then how do you plan and buy against it. Also, more private partnership with publishers. I believe that we will increasingly see in future all the premium content behind paywall, and the only way consumer will be able to access it, for example, is by making themselves known either via an email or a phone number or subscribing to that particular publisher or whatever sort of thing, right? So there are a number of different factors that tend to influence it, but as an advertiser, I'd say start with your own data first, then look into third-party solution which complements your rich data, and then make a decision on how to strike those partnerships with publishers or data vendors that are PII-based.
Yeah, I was wondering, Paul, did you want to jump in? Sorry.
No. I was just nodding in agreement.
Okay, no worries. I do love that you pointed at advertisers working on their first-party data first, because my fear, having been in the industry for a long time, is the kind of unspoken narrative that I see a lot of advertisers almost resigning themselves to the thought, oh, I don't have to worry about data. The walled gardens got data. I'll just use their data. But in reality, walled gardens, having self-appointed themselves as the trusted guardians of data in name of privacy, means that they have harnessed your data, their data, the industry's data, all the consumers' data for profit. And that means a strong disintermediation of the brand's relationship with their consumer. Now they not only have to pay for the media, but also pay a tax to access the right consumer. And that adds up. But for most, it really isn't necessarily something that helps democracy or to help a very informed public, because the means of information, they rely on the advertising pieces, to the monetization of their own content and data to be able to survive. Anyhow, I'll stop sharing my opinion. I'm here to moderate. And talking a lot about walled gardens, what do you guys, especially I think you, Krunal, passionate about this, think of the antitrust charges against Google, Facebook being accused of profiting of hate. I know that there is a Netflix documentary talking about, what is it called? The Social Dilemma. And it brings a lot of that about to the kind of, to the public that's not really in the ad tech space so much. What's your consideration, especially when you talk about the charges versus access to data or data democratization, because that kind of also makes your businesses, both you and Paul, a bit more difficult. And sort of how do you see what marketeers should be approaching this conversation? Should they be doing anything in regards to their spending, how they are working with walled gardens or not. How do they ensure that they, they push forward in a way that they retain control over their consumers in a sustainable way? Yeah.
So look, before I answer the question, let's not kid ourselves. Google and Facebook is a big part of our ecosystem, right? Large amount of traffic, rich amount of data across that platform, sort of thing, right? So by no way I'm trying to imply that we don't want to work with them or we want to stop funding them or whatever sort of thing, right? But there is a need, for likes of myself and Paul, for example, and everybody else who's advertising for their clients and advertisers, is to work more collaboratively and answer those questions. It's almost an opportunity for advertisers to diversify their investment, right? Till we get to a place where we are comfortable, advertising across these walled gardens. There's a world beyond Google and Facebook. You can work with a number of different partners in our ad tech space and martech space, sort of thing, and you still get access to that data and inventory, sort of thing. So again, this is, it's not about just two specific walled gardens, sort of thing. It's about how do you work collaboratively and how do you make sure the content, especially on Facebook, for example, that we advertising against, and be working with them just to make sure those issues are answerable. Also, we discussed in the previous question, it's also important more than ever before to harness your first-party data. Again, going back to the previous question, saying yes, if let's say in 2 years' time, for example, for a short period of time that you're not going to have access to walled garden data, for example, then you're kind of stuck, right? And then you're going back to either your first-party data or working with third-party PI-based consortiums, which can help you navigate through that challenges as well. So again, you have to be agile. You have to work with those walled gardens as well, but you also need to be brave enough to have solutions in place as a backup should there be a need for you to go down that route.
I would agree. I think Google and Facebook have made it very easy for marketers and agencies, and anything that's that easy, I think, needs to be queried and questioned. And the reality is, I think marketers should be comforted and know that there are other solutions, as Krunal has just indicated. If you can't get an answer to a question, I think you need to keep asking that question. So, do we know that we're spending the right amount? Have we got enough transparency? All of those questions usually come unanswered from the walled gardens. And as Krunal said, huge scale, huge audience, can't be ignored. But at the same time, if you're building a strategy for the next 10 years, you wouldn't put all of your eggs in one basket or even 2 or 3 baskets. You would start to test and experiment and explore. And I think if this pandemic and what's going on right now with the cookie apocalypse, the pandemic shift to e-commerce, if it's teaching brands anything, it's a time to experiment and look at different ways of doing things, look at different partners, think for the future rather than just for the next quarter, which is a challenge when your business is struggling. But if you don't, there's a danger that you wake up one day and you, as Krunal says, you just don't own any data or any customer information. It's all the FMCGs gave that to the retailers. There's a danger they're now just giving it to the walled gardens rather than building their own assets.
Indeed. I'm being nudged to about time, so I'm going to move swiftly into the next question, if that's okay, even though we can talk forever about this topic alone. I wanted to ask you guys about the very controversial ISBA PwC report. That is one that a lot of the news have been around the 15% that nobody can find in the mix. I personally think that the bigger headline there is that only 12% of the total media was audited because they couldn't match the data in the flow. I think a lot of agencies took a bashing because of the 15%, whereas there's plenty of reasons why some of that may not quite be here or there. But I think that in itself highlights a big issue in the industry, but also a great opportunity for players and agencies to demonstrate value. What is your view on that?
So, Lucia, I would agree. I think, as with every piece of reporting, different headlines take the direction of the story in a different, and I'm not sure the report focused on the right things. The fact that 15% of it couldn't be attributed, if you then look at the fact that publishers was 51% and the other was 49%, it actually means that 30% was unattributable to enhancements in some way. Now that is a problem. That is a problem. I think what brands need to do is to make sure that they do pay for quality advice, because it does cost to get the best people. And I interviewed the guys from ISBA and Sam from PwC the day of the report on my podcast, Time for a Reset. And one of the things Sam said was, this is a space where you really should hire the best, because there's a lot of cowboys, there's a lot of crooks, so hire the best. So I think that's one great piece of advice. The second is demand transparency from everyone. Demand it from your agencies, from the SSPs, from the publishers, and don't believe that they can't give you access to it. There are certain partners that will come up with all sorts of obfuscation that say that they can't give you access. And I think if marketeers knew that they could sign their own DSP agreements and they could ask for read-only access, write-only access, then they would ask different types of questions. But it's also worth remembering that every supply chain has lots of different layers to it, right? And we accept that there's a degree of kind of laws of diminishing returns in retail. So we write off certain amount of it. Or bananas, you look at the banana supply chain, the amount of people that take money out before it gets into your pocket, or a loaf of bread, that's not the issue. The issue is, are you comfortable with whether the money you're spending to enhance the targeting and the technology is actually going on that, or is it actually just going into the wrong pockets?
Yeah, I agree. And just to add to what Paul said, and you mentioned it when you asked the question, Lucia, we're talking about 12% of the sample, which is again quite a small sample when you're talking about millions and billions of spend that we're seeing in the industry. But it's also important that, as Paul said, we address and pick on the right question and right issues, sort of thing, right? And this report had shed the light on issues that we knew existed in the industry a long time ago, right? Initially, a few years ago, the issue was transparency between an advertiser and an agency. Then all the agencies and everything started opening up and they became transparent and everything. Now we're shifting focus from an agency to actual tech side. Now we want transparency on the sell side or buy side, ways a certain percentage of margin may take and whatnot, sort of thing. And what frustrates me sometimes is, as an industry, we'd love to concentrate on the issues and challenges, but nobody wants to talk about and be smart enough or brave enough to talk about solutions that are in place. I'm not saying they'll work, but we're all learning, right? We're living in an age where you're learning every day, sort of thing. Blockchain, for example, there are partners, there are tech available, sort of thing. Use them, experiment as well. So it's not just about, yes, there's an issue, we're not going to do anything. Hire clever people, as Paul said. Make sure you're questioning your agency, your planners, on how to become a better planner, sort of thing. And then work with ed tech sort of things and technology that's going to be working with you as transparently as your agencies would, as you would, sort of thing, as a business, right? So combination of humans and obviously technology and transparency from both sides is the way to go forward answering these issues.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I agree. Since you mentioned technology, should artificial intelligence be a consideration or table stakes, do you think? And for marketeers especially, and how should this evolve, and how should marketeers evolve to work with technology in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're managing multiple different campaigns, multiple different brands, millions and billions of impressions being bought every day, as a human, as a trader who's active in this campaign, there's only enough you can do in terms with regards to optimizations or changes or anything. So, you do need the machine learning. You need AIs to help make those right decisions as well, because machines will only do what you tell them to do, right? There's a self-learning element side of things as well. And there are a few examples, sort of thing, right? So, and we'll talk about in a bit, Adform's new flow solution, which is combining your AIs and complementing humans' optimization skills as well. If we talk about, how we launched Matterkind, going from Kedron to Matterkind, we've launched Mastermind, which is interconnected network of applications, which also addresses how to optimize across multiple different addressable channels. It's about optimizing across omni-channels. All this is not possible just by being that human on multiple different DSPs or multiple different technology or ad technologies. you need a UI, you need a machine learning, you need an AI who can help you bring everything together and make your life easy. Because you don't want to spend hours and hours trying to do optimizations across multiple different campaigns. So for that reason, yeah, I actually believe that it's important, but it's about making that right call. Which machine learning, which AI, how do you use it? Is it going to be beneficial to your client? Is it going to be beneficial to your employees? Is it going to save you time? So if you can answer all these questions and then identify the solution, then absolutely AI can only make your campaigns perform better.
Thanks for mentioning Adform Flow there. I do appreciate. We've been very excited this week to finally reveal it. Quick question before we go into the takeaways, but since you mentioned it, I'm going to take the opportunity. How do you guys view our launch? Do you think that marketeers do you see the value for your marketeers, for your business, and for the industry in regards to, it's 3 years in the making, completely redesigned, flawless, effortless modern marketing kind of a message that we are trying to pass over there. How do you, and if you don't mind both answering, how do you view that as valuable, considering that the industry is in a tough place? Ad tech, a lot of people talk about ad tech not really being as sexy as it was before, making such a huge investment as Adform has. What's your view on that?
So I guess Krunal and I wouldn't be here if we didn't believe that you were bringing something kind of useful and smart to the market. I would say that agencies need great technology, as Krunal just outlined, and particularly independent technology that helps them do what they do better. We all want to spend more time on the higher leverage, higher value actions for our clients, in terms of thinking about how do you strategize, how do you find new audiences, new potential kind of client value. But too often people spend too much time in ad ops, in reconciliation, in connecting different systems together, in logging into multiple different systems. And what I like about what you're doing is you're taking a lot of that pain away. I think effortless and flawless is a big claim, because I think everything requires effort, and digital is not flawless. But I like the fact that you've set your sights that high, because if you can create frictionless UI and you can take away those pain points, then that's hugely valued to a service-based business, because we want to serve our clients to actually drive long-term value, and that's how we retain and grow clients. But if we spend, I mean, I've been in digital since early 2000s, and the amount of time and energy wasted by teams on manual kind of stuff for ad tech is ludicrous. So it's very welcome that you're changing that. We all need to spend more time on actual planning and insight generation that drives incrementality and better results. So anything that does that is very good from me.
Wonderful. Well, I think we are running short on time. So I just wanted to ask from you guys, what are your 3 takeaways here that sort of marketeers can use to make impact in the real world? From our discussion, or from anything that we might not have touched as well?
Yeah, so just to finish off, there's just a couple of things I'd like to say. And what 6 months, past 6 months should have taught everyone is to care, right? It's important to care for your people, for your family, for your client. We're living in a world where we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring to us, right? So it's more important than ever to make sure you're working together collaboratively with your team, making sure you understand other people's challenges, needs, and I'm not just talking about from a work perspective, but from a personal life perspective as well. So it's very important that we show that care and then work together to change the world for and take it to a better place, sort of thing. And it's okay if you don't have answers to everything, right? We don't have answers to COVID right now, but we're working, we're fighting. It's about fighting every day. Everyone's learning, right? So we're thriving to get there. So, when you're working, when you're planning across complex ad tech and martech and millions of different partners and buying billions of impressions, sort of thing, it's okay not to get it right every day, because everyone's learning. But as long as you're brave enough to put your hand up, admit it, learn it, take feedback, work collaboratively, it shouldn't be a challenge for you as a marketer.
I love that, Krunal. Difficult to follow that. But I would say from your same theme, my number one would be using technology and being human and personal and not in friction with each other. I think when people talk about machine learning and automation and program, some marketers think, well, that's not about being human. The reality is it allows us through data and insight, if done well, to actually communicate on a more personal level. So remember that you can do that. Second, I would say ask more questions. Ask more questions of your partners, of the walled gardens, of whether things are working. And now's the best time to do that, right? When you're spending less and you've got more time to think about the right types of investment, it's a really good time to do that. And the third thing I would say is focus on marketing, measurement and attribution that drives lift, actual incrementality. There's a lot of advertising that's spent where I think it's very difficult to know whether it drove any material change. But if you look at the lift that is generated in revenue, profit, or whatever else, you won't go far wrong.
So, care, okay to not get it right, learn, use tech, being human, ask more questions, marketing, measure, look at incrementality. And by the way, incrementality is one of my favorite words in this industry. Back from my advertiser days at eBay, I used to hammer everyone with my incrementality model. Everybody hates it.
It amazes me how few people actually focus on it, though.
I know.
Even today. I mean, I remember talking about attribution and back in 2002, 2003, and then again in 2006. We still haven't. I think it's one of the biggest problems in marketing is how can you attribute value and where are you attributing it to? Because otherwise you don't know whether you're doing the right things.
Yeah, it's shooting blind and looking at graphs, but they don't necessarily. It's the correlation versus causation world.
Right.
Well, wonderful. Thank you guys for your time today. Thanks, Pragmatic Pioneers, for having us. It's been a great discussion. Gabri?